Hey guys, Magnet back here with another video, but this time it's not going to be a tutorial. This time we're going to talk about the new Legacy of the Void changes, and specifically for Protoss, and I will go through every single race if you wanted my feedback on other ones. So basically I'm just going to talk about the stuff that they added, give you a quick summary, and kind of tell you what I think about where it's going to go and what their overall idea was. So let's go ahead and get started here. Now, with Legacy of the Void, some changes that are made to basically all races and kind of some extra game modes that they're adding is that all races will start the game with more workers. Right now it's at 12, and all of this information definitely is subject to change, so be aware of that. Mineral patches are going to be 1,000 instead of 1,500. Gas counts appear to be 2,000 instead of 2,500, and I say appear to be because they never really announced it, but that's what it was during their show matches. So basically what this means is that they're going to try to make the game start faster and bases mine out faster. So those numbers aren't too important, but that's their whole idea with it. Another couple of cool things that they're doing is they're doing automated daily tournaments, which was kind of a thing that I thought they should do a long time ago, so they finally got around to doing that. And Archon mode, which is basically like 2v2, except for you both control the same race. Kind of cool as well. I guess we'll see where those go. Now let's get into the Protoss changes here really quickly, and these screen grabs are just from the actual video that they released, so you can go watch it anytime. So the first one they talk about is the Disruptor. This is kind of like a mine type of unit in the sense that it detonates in an area, but it doesn't kill the unit or anything. It's kind of, I mean, that's the best way I can describe it, is maybe like banelings or like a mine or something. So basically what happens is you roll in there, you turn on its ability, which makes it invulnerable, and then you try to blow stuff up with it. This unit's really cool. I like the idea with it. I think that we're probably going to have to see a lot of different things from this as time goes on, because I'm not sure how it's going to work out right away. I think it'll be annoying if people just have to constantly micro away from it, but overall I think it's a cool idea. I think this one's really going to stick around quite well, and I don't think we're going to see too huge of changes over time to this. Next they talked about the Immortal and how they're going to change that. They basically removed the hardened shields up there and turned it into an ability where you can turn it on, it'll absorb a whole bunch of damage for you. And yeah, so it's kind of a little bit different. So their idea with this is that this unit is really too centered around hard counters as it is. So it's hard countered really easily by a lot of Hydralisks or a lot of Zerglings or something. So you can turn on that ability and they'll just take a whole bunch of damage until the extra shield or whatever it is going to be is gone. So that's kind of cool, and it also makes it so that it doesn't win as hard against things like siege tanks or things that deal a lot of damage but in really big bursts. So it'll be different, but I think this idea is a good one. I'm a little bit worried about how it's going to affect other matchups where that stuff actually mattered. Like, for example, if you're trying to fight against Blink or really fast gateway all-ins, I think it's going to hurt it against those type of things. Maybe not too bad, but I'm not sure of the specifics on the shield. I didn't get a chance to play around with that too much at BlizzCon. So what I think is going to happen is there will be kind of like a timed shield on there. So it'll put the shield up and it'll absorb a whole bunch of damage, and either the shield goes away because it absorbed a bunch of damage or because the timer ran out. I'm not sure how they're going to change this, but this one also seems very permanent. I don't see them doing a whole lot with this one from now until when the game comes out. And of course, if you're watching this later on and they've changed this, any of these things, you're going to go back and laugh and be like, wow, he's an idiot, thinking these are that permanent. So yeah, these all are very much subject to change, but I really don't see this one changing too much from this iteration. They really just want to reduce the amount of ways it just completely counters a lot of strategies and is completely countered by a lot of strategies. So I think it's cool. I think it's a step in the right direction, and overall their message is a lot less about hard counters. So let's talk about Warp Prisms now. The biggest and I think only change thus far is the fact that you can load into your Warp Prism from a lot further away. So if you take a look at this picture, if you see that Immortal can actually be loaded into the Warp Prism from that distance, which is just craziness. And later on they show a little clip in that same video of it being microed away from big roach swarms, and it's weird. This is definitely a weird change. I'm not sure how I feel about it yet, and I'm not sure how powerful it's going to be. When they were first announcing this and I saw this change, I immediately thought, oh my god, that is way too strong. I don't think that's ever going to go through. But then thinking about it more, maybe it's not as bad as I first thought. The reason being is that if you can micro your warp prism really well with putting units in there from a long distance and unloading them really quickly, you're effectively giving blink to every single ground unit that Protoss has. And that's pretty crazy, especially if you combine it with things like Colossus, all kinds of different things that you could be using on the ground that are really, really strong. But I think Colossus, Immortals, stuff like that, if you basically give them an ability to blink back like that, it's going to make it really, really hard to engage Protoss armies. So I feel like they're going to have to put some sort of restriction on that. For example, you can't do it with massive units to prevent the Colossus from doing that. But the more they start to add on weird restrictions like that, the less likely it is for them to actually go through with the change. So, I don't know. I feel like if they're going to go with something like that, then a lot of things really need to change. Otherwise, micro to keep Colossus alive, especially, say if like Marauders are trying to chase it down, are going to be way, way too strong. So, again, I could be wrong, but my first instinct on this is I can imagine situations where that would be completely and totally broken. So, I don't know. I guess we'll see on this one, but I don't have a lot of faith in it. It'd be cool, but I just don't... I don't know. That's all I have to say. Let's check out the Oracle now. They announced a couple of changes to the Oracle. The first one's super simple, and that is that Revelation and the detection ability, I can't even remember what it is because it's just so standard and so, like, predictable, I guess. They've basically been combined into the same ability where you can reveal with the Revelation spell, and then they got rid of the other one. And I thought this was really overdue. I expected them to actually change this during the beginning of Heart of the Swarm, because the mechanic of just turning a unit into another observer is kind of boring, and it allowed a little bit too much safety for Oracle plays, especially against like DTs and mind drops and stuff. So this is a change I thought they were going to do a long time ago, but this one, I really don't see them ever changing this. This is very predictable, a very easy change to see go through. So there's not much of a reason to talk about that. The other ability it got that's very different and very new is this stasis ability. Basically, if you see that mine there in the bottom left, kind of the bottom center, that's a cloaked mine type of thing, and if anything comes near it, it sets it off, and it puts units in stasis, kind of like the Arbiter did in Starcraft 1. And the units that have those triangle pyramids around them are the ones that have been stasis, and basically means that they get locked down, they can't be attacked, they can't do any damage, nothing happens to them for a long period of time. I have some big concerns with this though. Number one is that if they do it in sort of a mine style, then this will be very easily countered by people just carrying overseers everywhere. And just killing the mine before it can really do anything. The only way this could not be the case is if those mines actually can't be attacked. They were really vague on how that's going to work, and the only way that really makes sense is that the mines can't be attacked. It's basically, the micro would be you just set off the mine with one unit. But again, it seems a little predictable. I really like the idea. I really like the idea of stasis and the fact that Protoss has these moments in the game where they just can't defend everything because there's so much stuff and they have so little stuff, especially in PvZ, which I think is what this was directed around. But if people just start carrying around overseers with their army, then it'll basically be a point where the Oracle puts down the mine and it's up to the other player not to mess up. And if they don't mess up, then the investment that they put into the Oracle will probably not be worth it. So I'm going to expect quite a few changes from this ability, whether it's moved to other units or something like that, or has different mechanisms to it. I could honestly see them doing something as wild as putting it as an immediate cast on the Mothership Core and removing Overcharge, because that would be a much more interesting way to deal with the stuff that comes through rather than just overcharge and sit there. But even that is pretty strong. So I don't have a lot of faith in the implementation of this ability, but I do like the idea of it, and I'd like to see it stick around in some form or another. So let's talk next about the Tempest, which was another thing that they changed a lot. The Tempest was something that I just really did not like from the beginning of Heart of the Swarm, because their whole message with Heart of the Swarm was kind of similar to what they did here. What they were trying to do in Heart of the Swarm is trying to make units a lot less about, you know, death balls and sticking to this one big thing and blobbing into your enemy. They envisioned the Tempest to kind of be a long-term damage unit that does damage really slowly and does it fairly safely. But the problem with it is just that it was so slow that it became a very niche unit. Nobody really applied it that way, and it slowed the game down a lot, which went against their goal of kind of speeding the game up and making it more interesting in Heart of the Swarm. So I'm really glad to see these changes. Basically what they changed is that the Tempest can only attack ground units now, which is weird. I'm not really sure what to think about it, but I don't think it actually changes the unit's application too much. But the other thing that it does is it has an ability now that can be assigned to basically any unit, and what happens is the ability will drain their health over a long period of time. It's some crazy number, like 500 health over like 50 seconds or something like that. So the unit will eventually die unless it's like repaired or transfused or something like that. So it kind of still is the answer to things like Broodlords or maybe Colossus or something, but it's in a lot different way. I really, really like that ability. I like the fact that they're making it a lot more about giving the other player a choice as far as what to do, and still giving them ways to kind of deal with that, so that it doesn't completely eliminate things like Broodlords from the game, but it also does keep things interesting in the sense that if the Broodlords are already dealing damage while they're being killed, then at least they still did something rather than just nothing against the Tempest. So I think that's cool. But I think the fact that the Tempest only attacks ground, or that they're trying to limit it that way, will really turn into a lot more hard counters to that unit, so I'm not sure how much I like that in the spirit of them trying to remove a lot of the hard counters, but I guess we'll have to see. I feel like this one's going to be changed quite a bit, but I think the whole idea of it dealing a lot of damage over a long period of time in something other than just trying to shoot it or something will be really cool. And it should at least help try and break up the Swarm Host games where there's like a million Tempest versus a million Spore Crawlers and Vipers, and it's just impossible to break that. Now with this ability you can at least supposedly just assign that, you know, kill it eventually thing to the Spore Crawler, and it'll eventually die rather than wasting or risking getting your Tempest pulled in. But even still, that's still a risk you're going to run, but at least it would assure that some spores would die. So, I don't know. They're on the right track here, but again, this is going to undergo quite a few changes, I'm sure. Okay, last unit change is going to be to the carrier. And a lot of people have kind of brushed this off and thought, Protoss only got one new unit. And it's like, yes, Protoss did functionally get only one new unit so far. They might be announcing a new unit that they've been talking about, or at least kind of dropping hints at. But this change is crazy. This is going to really make the carrier relevant. For one thing, they actually changed the build time on carriers from 120 seconds to 90 seconds, which is so huge of a difference, because in the past, the only way you'd ever be able to get enough out of carriers is if you had about 6 of them, and you'd have to pay all this money and wait forever for them to come out, and you usually die during that time. So the fact that they have a faster build time is a big deal. It's going to change a lot. So this is the one change I'm looking at where people are really overlooking. It's going to change a whole bunch that they just don't consider yet. As far as the implementations to the unit, it's not just a build time change. They actually have new ways to deploy your interceptors that'll deal with the kind of dumb AI that they've had throughout Starcraft 2. So going back to Brood War, in Brood War, you could micro your carriers back and kind of keep them alive while the interceptors would stay busy. And they're keeping that same thing with this. So there's, from what I understand, they didn't really explain it too much. They kept it really vague in the video, and I think that's on purpose. But the way it works now is that you can either deploy your interceptors over an area, and the interceptors will always stay there, I think in both circumstances, but there's some differences. So let's just call it Mode A and Mode B. Because I don't know what they're named right now. So as far as I can tell, Mode A is that the interceptors are deployed and they just fight like they normally do. Things can attack the interceptors, and they can either target your carrier, you can kind of move your carrier back a little bit, but the interceptors will stay in that area. and if they go out of range, then they will return back to the carrier. I'm pretty sure that's how it works. Mode B is that you just deploy the interceptors and they can be deployed from an insane range. Nothing can attack the interceptors, and the interceptors will stay there until they just die, and they'll all die at a certain time limit. The other difference with this is that nothing can attack the interceptors, so this is something I'm really worried about, and I think this is the reason they kept this vague, is because if you do something like that, you kind of make the carrier into the new swarm host, except for the interceptors cost money. Which is not all bad, but at the same time it basically gives Protoss the ability to just get some carriers out, go up to an area and just say, guess what, this area is mine. It won't be as bad as the current iteration of the swarm host because the interceptors will die and you'll have to waste a bunch of time rebuilding them. But at the same time, I really like the idea of being able to claim territory for a temporary amount of time and kind of take a risk like that, and especially implementing that with a new unit. Or rather, not a new unit, but a unit that's really not used in the game right now. So I think this idea is really cool, and I think it will stay for the most part, but they're going to have to be really careful. They're going to have to wait a long time and test a lot of different game scenarios to assure that it doesn't make it so that it encourages both players to just sit there and wait for interceptors to either kill everything or kind of do nothing the same way that the swarm host did. I am very worried about the power level of these two iterations right now, and I think they're going to eventually settle on one direction or another. The other cool thing that I don't remember if I mentioned about Mode A is that even if the carrier dies, the interceptors will stick around until they're killed. So it seems like they're playing around with a lot of different statuses between whether the interceptors can be attacked or not, whether they return back to the carrier after a certain range. Stuff like that. They seem to be mixing and matching a whole bunch of different ideas just to see what's going to work out. But the fact that they want to make the carrier relevant again is a huge deal. It's going to totally change the game, and it's going to totally change the way that Protoss' tech and the types of builds we're going to see, which I'm very happy about. So we'll see what happens with this. Mode A and Mode B, I'm positive will not stick around, both being in the same, both on the carrier at the same time. And I'm not even sure if Mode A and Mode B is actually a thing. I just based that off of what I saw in the video, and I didn't get a good chance to test that at BlizzCon. But I'm pretty sure that both modes exist right now, and there's no way that by the time the game actually releases that both modes are still there. It's going to be one or the other, and it's going to be some middle ground between the two ideas. So we'll see what happens with that, I'm sure. So lastly, let's talk about some other random changes that were on there that weren't really announced in the video. And that is that the Nexus starts with 14 supply to accommodate for the fact that you now start with 12 workers. I mean, that would only make sense. It would also, this is something that people haven't really thought of, it would also make expanding a lot cheaper because the Nexus would carry that much extra supply, whereas before, the Nexus would carry that plus about half a pylon. Doesn't seem like a big difference, but anytime you increase supply on a starting building like this, it's going to make expanding a lot less expensive and therefore a lot less risky. So we'll see where that goes. Warp-ins now have an 8-second timer instead of 5, and units that are warping in take 200% damage, both of which I think are really good changes because it softens a lot of the big warp gate timings that I think are really gimmicky and kind of uninteresting. And the 200% damage is kind of cool, so it gives people options to as far as what to shoot when those are warping in. Like, do you shoot the ones that haven't warped in yet, or do you shoot the ones that are already hitting you? The choice seems fairly obvious to shoot the ones that are warping in, and that's usually what happens anyway. But what they really want to do is they want to punish people harder for making stupid warp-in choices. They want to put a little bit more thought behind that, and I think it's a good idea. Force fields. Zerg now has a unit to break force fields, which effectively means that the Immortal All-Ins and Gateway All-Ins are probably all but dead in that matchup, since there's a guaranteed way to just break right through them and use your Roach, Ling, and Ravager, which is the unit that can actually do it, to overrun those. So I think you're going to see a lot less gimmicky play from PvZ, and I really, really like that because Gateway and Immortal All-Ins are very uninteresting to watch, and it kind of propels Protosses that don't take the time to learn the matchup in a very intricate sense, an easy way to just get wins. So I'm very glad to see those gone for the most part, assuming that sticks around, and I can't imagine that it will go away. So a concern that was brought up with this is that if you're trying to defend your base from a lot of stuff and you have force fields at your disposal, if they can just break it with one, then that seems pretty cheap of them. But at the same time, the unit that as it is right now, I'm not sure if they're going to make Ravagers require lair or not, and I didn't get a chance to confirm that or not, but either way, I think it's a soft enough change to the point where that won't really be too much of an issue. The other thing that I'm kind of concerned about a little bit with that is that a lot of modern builds right now, in order to hold a faster third base, rely on a lot of force fields. And if they can just undo that advantage that you have, then it kind of nullifies the whole expansion. So I think they're going to have to be a little bit careful with that idea, or they're going to have to make other ways for Protoss to secure a third base. For example, with the Oracle Stasis. It's just something that they're probably going to have to change eventually. Lastly, you can see that the last thing on here is that Photon Overcharge only targets ground units. I don't know how I feel about this one, to be honest. I feel like Photon Overcharge is kind of a band-aid solution, kind of boring to begin with. But this one seems silly because it completely takes away the whole idea of being able to control the Photon Overcharge. And especially if you're having to use that to offset medevac drops. That was kind of the whole reason that Photon Overcharge exists in the first place, is that Terran got these new drops, and Protoss needed a solid way to kind of buy time until they could move their army in position to deal with that. My only argument for this is that maybe with the new carriers, that's going to make it so that you won't have to worry about that so much, so that if somebody tries to drop on you and you have a lot of carriers out, the interceptors, if they can't be attacked, for example, will just wreck the drop anyway, and it might not be that big of a deal. The other concern I have with this is that if you can't overcharge and hit air units, that Phoenix PvP will become a very real and very annoying thing, to the point where every PvP might break down to being Phoenix versus Phoenix because there's no reason to do anything else. And that would be really lame. I'd really hate to see that happen. So I think that's actually a much bigger change than they advertised it to be. And that's something that could really break a lot of the standard gameplay flow that we would see right now. And I really have to say that Phoenix versus Phoenix PvP is probably one of the dumbest game scenarios to play out. So with all that in mind, let's just talk about their general ideas of what they want to do with this game. They want to make this game a lot faster. They want to make it more about micro. They really want to give better options for harassment and kind of controlling different parts of the map at the same time. To be fair, in pro games by the end of Heart of the Swarm, at least at top level pro games, you were already kind of seeing this idea in the sense that the players were already splitting off little groups of units and doing harassment like all the time, anytime they had any option. But now it seems like they're really trying to push that down to the lower leagues and say, you know, there's fewer options for kind of defending harassment, at least in a very straight up sense, where you can just blob your army and attack at the harassment. And they really kind of want to make the game a lot more interesting to play, a lot more varied. And the whole idea with the faster workers, or rather the more workers, not faster, but more workers to start the game, and the expansions that mine out faster, is really just making the game much more about taking bases faster, harassing a lot more, and making the game's end kind of in the mid-game stage where a player that's really good at multitasking will basically always win against a player that has inferior multitasking. So they're really trying to centralize the game to those ideas, which I think is pretty cool. It's really something that's kind of overdue, especially since it seems like the interest in watching professional StarCraft has dwindled, and this will be a huge shot in the arm if they go in this direction. They want to also put more emphasis on all-ins versus macro play, and the bases mining out faster will mean that all-ins will have a far less lifespan. So if somebody all-ins, it'll kind of be like the game's going to be determined in the next minute or so, rather than an all-in having 4 or 5 different stages where their main base still hasn't mined out, so they're still on 2 bases, for example, so they can keep going with the all-in for 5 or 6 minutes. So that's kind of cool, and I think it also rewards people that are able to macro and take bases on time versus getting overwhelmed and not knowing what to do. We've already mentioned a little bit about map control. I won't mention too much more about that, other than I think what they're going to try to do is make it so there's a bunch of little battles going on at the same time, rather than a big fight kind of determining every game. So that'll be interesting to see how that develops. I think they also want to really diversify the available strategies in this game, and that means making mech more viable against Protoss. That also means making the different tech paths for Protoss available in basically every matchup with the advent of the carrier, the new Tempest, and the new Oracle abilities. So pretty happy about that. And lastly, this is really their last chance to make Starcraft something different than what it's been throughout its lifetime so far. I think they really want to think about this in the sense that Brood War games and Brood War professionals lasted so long because the game was so hard to play. It really separated who was the better player and who wasn't, and it made for really exciting and complete chaos games where people have 5 and 6 different armies fighting everywhere, and battles lasted longer and all kinds of different things. So they realized that this is probably their last chance to really get back to their roots with Brood War and make the game much more about multitasking and not being able to do everything because humans just physically aren't capable of doing everything that could be done. So overall, I'm really happy with the changes they've announced so far, and of course we need to say that not all these changes are going to be final. There's going to be a lot of things they're going to waver on and change all the time. But we'll see what happens with beta, and I'm sure I will be posting videos of just general gameplay stuff in beta. So yeah, I should have priority access to it considering I was at BlizzCon, and they did claim that they were sending out priority access beta keys to people at BlizzCon over, I'm not sure who else, but it seems like it was fairly important. So we're going to go ahead and call that good for the Protoss changes, and I'll be back with more videos I think fairly soon, probably not within the next several weeks until beta starts to give me some content to talk about. So we'll see what happens, but yeah, thanks guys for watching, and enjoy the new game when it comes out.